Friday Transportation Seminar at Portland State University. Today we're very pleased to have Nico Larco from the University of Oregon, and he's going to talk today about the Sustainable City Year and the multidisciplinary applied transportation projects that they and we have participated in for the City of Salem. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nico. Welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Great, so thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and talking to everyone here. Can I just get a sense of how many of you are in the transportation field specifically? How many of you are students? How many of you are planners? And how many of you are engineers? Good smattering of each. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is something that we're doing based at the University of Oregon, but doing in collaboration with PSU called Sustainable City Year. It's a program that started a couple of years ago. It's really a different way of, or a slightly modified way of doing transportation education and really applied focused. As Chris mentioned, I'm Nico Larco. I'm a professor actually in the architecture department, so I'm an architect, but affiliated faculty in planning, and one of the associate directors and one of the co-founders of the Sustainable Cities Initiative. So just first, before I get into the specifics of what Sustainable City Year is, I want to talk a little bit about what Sustainable Cities Initiative is. We're an organization, as I said, based in the University of Oregon, that the basic idea is if you want to do sustainability work, you have to work across any one discipline, right? It's impossible to get the work done just working within one specific discipline. You really have to be cross-disciplinary in your approach. And so what we started doing, we're a group of now 11 different disciplines, which I'll show you in a minute, that work on these issues collaboratively. And we do research work. There's really three prongs. We do research work, which is more or less the stuff that you expect to happen in a university and expect to happen around livability issues. We do work on active transportation. We do work on sustainable suburban development. We do work on green governance, so how you might have to change structures within a government to react to livability and sustainability issues. We do work on ecology in the city, so how it is that you can put together both ecological issues and habitat issues with development. So it's a whole range of things that are pretty straightforward, that are research-based. You know, most universities do. One of the differences with what we do is that one, we really push the multidisciplinary aspect of these things, and two, we're absolutely interested in being applied. So one of the mantras we have at SCI is there's no peer-reviewed journal article that doesn't also have a trade journal article, right? So we really are interested in getting the information that we're working on into the hands of people who can use it and make something happen with it. On the education piece, one of the big pieces that we do is a Sustainable City Year, which I'm about to talk about. And then we do work on policy and legislation. So for instance, we're in DC every once in a while. We've got a fantastic delegation in Oregon working on the transportation reauthorization, which that policy legislation affects what all of us end up doing, being able to implement in the real world related to sustainability and livability. We also do work at the local level and even talking about very local regulations. So there's some work that we've done on kind of multifamily housing. I actually presented on some of that work a couple of years back in this very seminar. But on how regulations at the very local level end up allowing or disallowing non-auto transport, so active transportation. So those are kind of the range of things we do. As I mentioned before, we have a whole range of partners that we work with very actively. So these are the range of disciplines we work with. The typical design fields or built environment fields, which architecture, landscape architecture, planning, policy. But we also have a whole range of fields that aren't what you necessarily think of when you think of the built environment and sustainability, but that are really kind of integral partners: law, business, journalism, arts administration. We're working with civil engineering here at PSU, Chris Monser. We just recently started working with the economics department. And the interesting thing is that some of these fields are fields that are really interested in sustainability issues. And some of these fields are fields that might be interested in sustainability issues, but they can apply the work that they do towards that end. So for instance, the economics department, they're really good at cost-benefit analysis. And so it's not that you have to have courses or projects that are specifically interested, kind of sustainability focused. You can just take those kinds of skills and apply them towards sustainability ends. So it's not so part of what we're interested in is not necessarily a wholehearted shift that everyone has to have sustainability front and center all the time or needs to be expert in those things, but that everyone can apply their skills towards these types of projects. So what just noticed my screen's very stretched here. The main thing I want to talk about today is this idea of the sustainable city year, which we see as kind of a new model for how you might deliver education, specifically transportation education as well. So the basic idea of sustainable city year is that we take existing university courses, work that all of you do, both as professors or as students, and point them towards one city for a year. Right? So you're taking things that you'd be doing anyway, but instead of doing hypothetical projects, you're working with city officials, city staff, local community groups on a specific project that means something to them at that moment. So on the one hand, you have the opportunity as a student to have a real-world impact, but you also get to learn that whatever it is you're doing, be it design, be it policy, be it planning, whatever that might be, is only a piece of the equation, right? There's this whole other thing, which is the politics around these issues, what the community believes about this, the feasibility of implementation, right? There's a whole kind of range of things that can be dealt with. And so, as I said, we take this one city and we point all these courses towards them. And I think the scale is probably one of the big differences in how we do this educational model as opposed to some other kind of existing models, because there's lots of courses, and I assume many of you have been involved with working with independent cities or agencies or community groups. The difference is we point a whole bunch of classes towards one place, which makes a difference in the impact that you can have, the amount of attention you get from the city, kind of the synergies, and then you get a lot of kind of rubbing up against each other that happens with different disciplines working on a single project. So there's a lot of interesting kind of benefits that can come out of that. So that's more, the basics of how it works is we partner with one city, we put out an RFP, find a city that is interested, a competitive process, and then what we do is we kind of do this matchmaking where we find things that city's interested in, projects that city's interested in across all these types of different disciplines, and then we do some matchmaking with professors who are teaching courses at the university and how projects they're interested in taking on. Then it kind of becomes a grassroots effort where that professor and the contact person at the state, the kind of the person who's going to be in charge of the project, or sorry, the city, the person who's going to be in charge of the project, really work together to figure out what is it that they need, what's the best value add for the city, and what's the best value add for the class, right? So that there's a certain amount of synergy can happen with that. So this actually only started last year, 2 years ago, 2009, with Gresham, and we kind of had this idea. There was about 4 or 5 of us around the table and said, well, this sounds like a good idea. We should try something like this. And we had some connections with Gresham, a city you all are familiar with, right? And we thought it was going to be 4 or 5 courses, and that quickly multiplied to 19 courses last year. So a huge, and across 7 different departments. So we started, sorry? Okay. I'm happy to take questions if there's questions. So across all these different disciplines, working towards this one city. Last year, we had our first RFP process, of which Salem was selected. And so this year, for the City of Salem, we have 16 projects happening across the city in 4 different kind of city agencies, 28 courses, 25 faculty across 10 departments, over 600 students, nearly 80,000 hours of student and faculty work is going towards the city. Huge amount of effort going towards one city. And as I said, 10 disciplines across 2 universities. We're working with PSU this year, which we're really excited about as well. So a huge kind of impact happening within the city. You have to read all this, but this just gives you a sense of the range of types of projects that exist. We have everything from straightforward design courses, right? So we're looking at things like redesigning a police station in Salem right now, looking at interior design for some of these spaces, doing whole urban design areas. But then we have things that are completely off the other side of that. So we've got an industrial byproduct reuse project where students kind of surveyed the major industries in Salem looked at what kind of outputs were coming out and what kind of inputs were happening in these industries, and saw if there was any synergies, either that one business's output could become another business's input, or that we could put together enough different outputs to have a scale that we could actually mitigate some of the, or reuse some of the waste that was coming out of these. So there's this whole range of kind of projects. What I'm going to talk about today, being in the format that we're here, is transportation-related projects. We have a number of projects, and I should mention as well that SCI is happily funded for MoTrek, so we get some funding for MoTrek, and it's really actually instigated quite a bit of transportation-related projects, which have been really, really interesting. So I'm going to go over some of those projects right now. Are there any questions so far?
Yeah, the cities, are you talking just in the... Are the cities in Oregon or throughout the United States, and and to what extent do the students travel to the cities and so forth?
It's a great question. So we've worked with cities in Oregon right now, and we see got a lot of good reasons to do that. Mostly because, one, we are a state institution, and we feel like we're somewhat responsible to our state, and we'd like to be responsible to our state and help make our state a great place. Another part is logistics, that having a bunch of students flying out to Nebraska or New York, whatever it might be, would kind of cut down on that whole sustainability idea. And also that there's somewhat of a regionalist approach as well. There's things we know really well about this region, and to go to different places, we might not be as effective. What we're really interested in is not so much us kind of taking this model to cities all over the place, but for us, hopefully working with other partner universities to be doing that. And so having other universities take on this model and start doing that around the country. So we've recently been speaking at University of Minnesota, University of California at Davis, and we're going to be talking in San Antonio. So the hope is to have a number of different schools that do this kind of work. There's another question over here.
Why is journalism and engineering linked?
Why are journalism and engineering linked?
Linked.
They're not specifically linked. Why, do you ask? Was there?
Journalism and engineering.
So that we were just trying to group them into something that was somewhat cohesive. I apologize for that.
And then communications and PR is just sort of a little PS down there.
Yes. So I should say some of the things that that we do is we work with the city to help them communicate with their constituents and their community about the kind of work that we're doing. So for instance, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, we've had, I think it's now 11 articles, most of which coming out on the front page, coming out in the Statesman Journal in Salem. So the city gets a chance to communicate with all the constituents of, this is the kind of work that we're doing, this is the conversation that we're having, which is part of, I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Any other questions?
What's the RFP process for a city who's interested in a project?
The RFP process. So the RFP comes out in December, and it's published on our website, sci.uoregon.edu. And more or less, there's kind of a set of criteria they need to fill out, which the things that we're looking for are buy-in from the top. So it's really important that we have buy-in from city managers, city council, and mayor, because that means that the whole city is really directed towards this. It's a substantial amount of effort from cities to do this work as well, so that and they get as much out of it as they put into it. Salem and Gresham have been fantastic examples of cities that have really put a lot into it, and hopefully we'll show you gotten a lot out of it. We also asked for them to put together a series of projects, a project list that they feel might be something that could work with what we've done, so they can look at projects that we've done in the past. They put together, typically it's been a list of somewhere 20, 25 different projects that they think might be interesting across a bunch of different departments, and we use that as a basis for that matchmaking that we're talking about.
Before you go on, I'd like to remind the audience, if you ask questions, to please use the microphones on your desk, because we're videotaping this, we want to record your voices too. And if your microphone doesn't work, if you press the button and the little red light does not come on, Professor Monsieur will come around with the handheld. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a little bit of so you get a sense of what kinds of projects can happen here. So one of the projects was actually Professor Monsieur had a course where they took on the downtown Salem circulation study. And what they were very much I see some head nodding. Were there people in here who were in that course? Yeah. Great, good, good. You can correct me here or actually help describe some of this. So the basic idea was that the city of Salem in their downtown area was interested in kind of some bike-ped connectivity, and the city, whereas it avoided having freeways going through it, still has quite a bit of through traffic circulation going through there, and they're trying to figure out how to merge that with some bike-ped kind of environments. So they looked at a whole range of different types of projects. They looked at some different places where they might be able to add bike lanes, and a lot of these ideas came from the city of like, well, we've had this idea here, or from the students of, well, what if you tried this? They looked at different areas where there was street crossings that were either didn't have pedestrian or bike amenities within them, or were really hostile to that. They looked at two-way street conversions, so there's a lot of paired one-ways that happen in the downtown, which work fairly well for throughput, but are not very conducive for the kind of walking and biking, also for some of the commercial businesses there aren't too fond of that. And they also looked at some trail realignments. So I'm going to go through just a couple of some of these projects. They looked at projects such as this. So this is a two-way street conversion. So this is Church Street and High Street, which are both paired one-ways. And so they did some basic modeling. So this is a class that looked at modeling, right? So how can you model the traffic that's going through this area? And they just said, well, instead of doing a hypothetical project, let's look at these actual existing right-of-ways. What if we switched around the road design? So instead of on the top having 3 travel lanes, we took 2 travel lanes and a turn lane with a median in it. Kept our parking all the same, which was something that the city really wanted. And they just simply did some of the modeling for that and came out, well, what would the effects of that be? And as might be imagined, a lot of there was actually a reduced capacity or reduced amount of cars that they can get through there, and also it took them longer to get through, which you would guess. So on the one hand, part of the recommendation was, well, if you're going to try to switch this over to be a two-way street instead of paired one-ways, you're going to have all these problems that come out with your throughput circulation happening in there. But on the other hand, if these are goals that you really want, which is to change the kind of environment of downtown, then this is the effect that you need to mitigate. Right? So and that's like basic data that the city needs to be able to start making decisions to figure out what its priorities are and figure out what kind of mitigations would have to happen if they want to follow those priorities. So this is valuable information that they're getting from the student work. Other projects, they did a whole range of projects which really looked at this issue of in the downtown there's a whole lot of intersections and crossings which are really quite hazardous and aggressive to anyone who's on a bike or a pedestrian. They have a whole lot of pedestrian networks or bike networks that exist, and then there's a couple areas that are completely shut off from the rest of the city because of these major intersections. And so they looked at a range of them, Union Street and Commercial Street, a couple areas on Liberty, and looked at, well, what are the options? Some of the projects they actually modeled what the traffic implications would be. Other projects, they simply looked at a whole bunch of case studies and did literature reviews of what kind of crossings might be put in this area, and then they actually gave proposals and evaluations of those proposals to the city. Excuse me. They looked at addition of bike lanes, so this is on Church and High as well, and they looked at, if they added the bike lane, what would the effect be on the level of service in some of the intersections? Again, obviously the level of service is affected negatively, right? There's decreased level of service, but that's a question for the city. That now they all of a sudden have data which they can then decide, well, what is it that we want to get done in the city? How would this affect our circulation patterns? How might it affect some of the council goals and the city goals that we have? So this becomes really useful information for the city. Really kind of related to this project was that a studio that I ran for the North Downtown waterfront area. So this is downtown Salem here, and there's this whole former industrial area that exists up here. We ran into, even though this is a design studio which actually worked with 3 planning courses and some law students for the area, so really looking at urban design was the main focus of this and some of the planning. Transportation was critical to this kind of project. So the basic idea was, This is a formal industrial area, really large blocks. This is the downtown here, and there's a road that comes right here, which is commercial, which is one of their main kind of arterials coming down into the city. It completely blocks off this whole area of the city. And so the city wanted to know what we could do with that. Well, the first thing we did, obviously, was look at some of the traffic counts for the area. And you can see here, there's a whole bunch of people who are coming down and then going through this bypass. And this area right here becomes impossible to pass over. And then there's an enormous block that happens here, which also makes it very hard to have any permeability into that area. And so we did a number of studies looking at what the traffic flow through this area would be. This is a picture of Commercial Street, and this is Front Street. It's a fairly undefined right-of-way with actually a railway running through the middle of it. A whole lot of issues happening there. But one of the things that came out of the discussion was students asking, well, what if we moved this is the area right here. What if we move that bypass, instead of happening down here, which causes kind of a backing up that happens in the city in this area and also cuts off that entire area, what if we move that somewhere north? And they looked at a whole bunch of areas that it could move all the way north, including one fairly north, as a way of changing the traffic pattern that would exist down here and therefore opening this whole area up for development. And then this is some of the schemes, I won't go into this too much, that they came up with if you did that. So what used to be a large swath coming over here and cutting out this whole area, all of a sudden we've distributed the traffic along these two streets, and there's the possibility then of developing this, and there's a whole bunch of other urban design and architectural features that have happened in this area. So through those kinds of discussions, what we very much noticed, and I think Chris's class came up with the same issue, is that all the pieces that we're looking at, they're all kind of fixes to a much larger problem that the city of Salem has with their downtown and how traffic is flowing through it. And so, one of the Sustainable City Year final reports mentions this. Salem has the traffic challenges that require major projects. And part of the discussion that happened through Chris's class, through the studio I taught, through the planning courses, which all kind of hammered at the same thing and said, if you want to change the way your downtown works, there's these small fixes that could happen. And we've given you a whole lot of examples of these, but these are all Band-Aids, and there needs to be a larger kind of shift that happens. And that kind of echoed some of the thoughts that had been happening in the city. And in a recent memo that was talking about what the budget impacts are coming out of SCY for Salem, they said, the mobility study, which they just got passed by council, was really an outgrowth of SCY project in the strategic plan to define improvements for bike, ped, and car access and movements. So this is a direct kind of effect of the work that all of the students did, the work that all the classes did, being applied, having these conversations, was another push that let the city kind of move towards, okay, we have enough data now to see there needs to be larger scale shifts happening. So it's really kind of exciting and to have students be part of that process, to understand what role they have in doing, in the back of the room, the small study that you did, how that affects the way that a city ends up thinking, oh, we really need to rethink our entire transportation plan. It's great kind of outputs. To give you a couple other examples of the kind of work that's coming out of SCY that are transportation related, there's a course that Professor Schlossberg teaches, who's also one of the co-founders of SCI, in planning, and this is a GIS course. So it's trying to teach students to do GIS. Instead of doing hypothetical projects, they're all pointing towards Salem, and Salem has a wealth of things that they want to know and pieces they want to have figured out. And so students took a whole bunch of different projects, of which I'm going to show you just a few of them. So one of them was simply walkability in downtown Salem. So what students did is they went around and they actually surveyed all the different paths that exist in downtown Salem for where they actually existed, what trails existed, the quality of that path, the curb cuts that existed. Right? So all of a sudden they created a GIS letter with just in that was a piece of information that the city needed to be able to make decisions about how their pedestrian network works. So here students just learning how to use GIS, right, has created this valuable piece of information for them. And then they worked that to become a web app, which will show you from any 2 points within the downtown the quickest way to get there, but also the safest way to get there. Right? So anyone can go in and figure out where is it that there's the problems with the curb cuts, the fast-moving traffic. And this is actually a web app that the city's using right now. They're uploading it so that citizens can use it. Another group of students were doing a similar thing, but with a bicycle network. And they more or less said, this is the way that most bike networks look in GIS, right? You simply have the center line of the street and that one intersection. And they said, well, what if we model it correctly? This is really what an interchange looks like for bicycles. These are all the different places that a bicycle can go. And if we do that, then we start to understand much more what the quality of these spaces are for a bike. For a biker. They looked at that and they added something called fear factor for different types of streets, of how fast the traffic was moving, what kind of intersections existed. And they came up with these 3 different maps of, this is the entire bike network that exists right now in Salem. But if we start looking at the fear factor, enthused and confident cyclist, but not quite a strong and fearless one, really this is what the network looks like. And if you're an interested but a concerned cyclist, so my mother more or less, right, that this is what the bike network is. So they're putting all this into GIS, so the city now has a base that they can start working from of, if we really want it, who's our target population that we're working on, that we want to get out and biking, and then where are the gaps within these different networks. They also put together a web app which tells you the quickest route, and then also the safest route, the safest, least fear factor route from one place to another. One other kind of side thing, one of the students, the city was interested in doing an off-street network marathon in Salem. And while the student looked at a whole bunch of different options, wasn't able to find a completely off-street network, they found one that was mostly off-street network. And so they put together an entire route for the city, which actually the city is looking for funding to implement this. So we could all be running this Salem marathon or half marathon sometime soon. So again, this is coming out of the memo. So ideas from this course to feed into bicycle and pedestrian element of transportation system plan update with the aim of improving safety for bicycles and pedestrians. So the work that's coming out of this is being put in their transportation system plan. It's part of the inputs, both the GIS level and some of the the GIS data that they got, but also just some of the outcomes and analysis, and that they're using a lot of this data and actually the web apps to help inform their citizens and their staff. One last project. So part of the idea of the way we look at transportation at University of Oregon, because we don't have an engineering department, right? And yet we see transportation as critical to a lot of the different disciplines that we work in. So architecture, landscape architecture, planning, in this case product design, looking at how our work in all these different fields relates to the transportation world. This is an issue that came actually from a mixture of things. As we were working with Salem, a professor in product design said, I want to do something with you guys. This seems really interesting. I see a lot of energy from students. I love the idea of applied projects. We want to try something out. And so we went to the city and said, we have product design that's interested in working on something. What do you have? And they said, streetlights. Streetlights are a big issue for us. There's 2 pieces of it. So this is actually a combination of product design and planning, both working on the streetlights project, which on the one hand is trying to figure out what the actual lights are. So the lights that they've got, which I don't remember the actual type they've got right now, they're not satisfied with. And they want to find something that's 1, more sustainable, and 2, does a better job of controlling where the light goes. So energy efficient, but also more control of where the light goes. So product design said, we can do that. That's great. And then on the other hand, they said the way that it's funded right now, the way the streetlights are funded right now, is a mechanism that's more convoluted that I'll go into right now. But it turns out that there's different systems for funding streetlight, which is a huge expenditure in cities around the country. And they said, we want to look at different models of how this is done so we can figure out if we can reallocate the way that our funding happens and free up some funding. And so we've got some people doing a capstone project in planning who are looking at the funding mechanisms, looking at case studies around the country, and looking at Salem's model and seeing what can be applied. And then we had people in product design looking at actually the design of the light itself. So they first did studies looking at what the spread of different lighting types and what is needed. So this is, for a bike, what's needed, for a pedestrian, what's needed, and for an automobile. And then they kind of put all that together, came up with a whole bunch of different schemes. This is one of them here, which was called the MELAS streetlight. So this is LEDs in there. And that's more or less what the glow would look like from that. They actually ended up fabricating one of these and are going to be prototyping some of this stuff to actually put it into into work. Again, from the City of Salem memo, that they're actually doing a demonstration project with these park lights that they developed, and the capstone project is almost coming to a close now, and they're looking at really shifting the way that they're funding the streetlights. So again, student work, existing courses, existing kind of classes being applied towards a city with real tangible outcomes, and we're a little bit overwhelmed with how many real tangible outcomes we've got already. We're not even done with the year, and we're already seeing a lot of work changing within the city. As I mentioned before, part of what the whole program of SCY does is trying to get communication out of, like, this is what's happening in the city. So we working with the city to find venues for that. The Statesman Journal has done a whole series of articles. This one actually came out just a few days ago, which is on some of the work I talked to you about from the GIS course. And it's a great way to, one, educate the citizenry about these issues, to get the conversation going, and to almost get everyone up to date so that some of these issues can be addressed by council and can be put towards bond measures and can be part of the dialogue that's happening in the city. So it's a really, again, this isn't work that's happening in a classroom just about a hypothetical thing. This is pieces that are being put out in the real world, and the citizens are part of this as well. Many of our classes work very specifically with community groups that have interests one way or another. Some of the classes are strictly focused on civic engagement and how communication happens. We were thrilled we got there was even the Salem Business Journal, which business journals typically are fairly conservative organizations. Had this quote: "We'll invest just over $300,000 to support a one-year research and design project that will leave Salem $12 million richer." So we're really excited that they see this as a really good investment, all the work that's happening. It's really a win-win all around. We recently had an article in the New York Times that came out in the fall. It said SCI is perhaps the most comprehensive effort by a U.S. university to infuse sustainability into its curricula and community outreach. So this is a great opportunity for how we can get students to work on sustainability and get it out there and be applied. So like I said, we're hoping that this can happen in many different places, not just here in Oregon. And more and more, we're looking forward to having more courses from PSU actually working with us next year. So this model, what are the benefits of it? Some of these things I've mentioned, but just to kind of recap. For students, a fantastic benefit is you get to work on real-life things. You get to you get to understand how the skills that you're learning actually are applied in the real world. You get to understand that for the designers, myself being teaching design a whole lot, is that design is only part of the equation, right? That there's all this other piece about implementation and politics which are just as important, and it's impossible to understand the politics of a project in a hypothetical situation. You get to interact with all these different disciplines, right? So some of the courses that I showed you have different disciplines working together. You're doing that in school as opposed to doing it for the first time out when you're working professionally. So there's a lot of benefits through there. For the participant cities, on the one hand, and we thought when we started this program this would be the key thing, right, is that they have increased capacity, right? That they'd look at 80,000 hours and smile like crazy. Oh, wow, 80,000 hours, that's great. And that is actually something that they're very excited about, but they're also excited about all these other pieces as well. One of them is you have 620-somethings coming into your city and just energizing the staff and the citizenry with all these different ideas, right? Which is, if you've ever been around 620-somethings, which I think most of you are a lot, it can be very energizing. You also have a number of people from the city who might have been working, are very good at the work that they do, but haven't quite put sustainability into that, or sustainability is this concept, they're not sure how that fits in the work that they're doing right here. You all of a sudden have a class of 30-some-odd students who are doing nothing but trying to help you with that issue. You've got the opportunity as well that the students can be riskier, can try things that maybe the city wouldn't try out or a consultant wouldn't try out, right? Because we have the benefit of having a whole lot of students working on a project. So some of the outcomes that students might come up with might be a little bit outside of the realm of reality. So hopefully some of them are right on the edge, right? So they're a little bit outside of the scope of what was really being considered, but are new, fresh ideas that might have some legs. And we've been seeing a lot of that both in Gresham and in Salem. So there's been a lot of, excuse me, a lot of really good benefits for the cities. From the private sector, it gives the opportunity for moving forward on a whole lot of projects that didn't have any legs under them. So we've seen this both in Salem and in Gresham, projects that had kind of dead-ended or had lost steam from the city due to capacity or due to some other issues, all of a sudden get re-energized and more ideas kind of put towards it. We've got the ability as well of kind of acting as, universities have the possibility of acting as neutral third parties. We're not the city, so we've had examples where there was distrust between some community groups and the city because of histories that existed well before us, and we can come in and say, you know, we're not part of that history. We're interested in doing this good work here, and kind of start a dialogue which can bring those two parties together. And we've seen a lot of specific examples where that's happened. For the private sector, we get to move these projects forward, which is really great, because for anyone who's interested in the private sector and actually getting some work and putting some things into the ground, let's say. On the other hand, we also help educate their whole clientele, right? So in talking to the city and the citizenry and the staff about sustainability issues, if you're a business who has sustainability as part of what you offer, we've just given a whole overlay of sustainability to the people who are going to be putting out RFPs. We have, you know, a great comment from the person in charge of redevelopment from Gresham said, you know, the RFPs that come out next year on some of the topics that we dealt with had nothing to do with the RFPs that came out the year before, because all of a sudden sustainability was infused into them. So it's kind of a really powerful piece. So the private sector, really there's opportunity to have work developed, have relationships developed. They get to come in and work with students. We have a number of examples this year where specific firms are working with individual classes on these projects, and they can help kind of be part of the process and help shape that process all the way through. And then the benefit for universities is really great. So on the one hand, we have a chance to, being a state university, we have a chance to be at the service of the state, to help the different cities throughout the state push their sustainability agenda and really help them with that. We've also got the opportunity at the university to help get our message out. So the university has a chance of being very, very visible out in the communities that we work with, which is great for all of us, so that we're not, you know, holed up in an ivory tower, or we don't allow people to have the impression that we're holed up in an ivory tower, that we really are out in the communities and helping out. Two other great things is, one, it gives us a great number of connections to networks outside of the university, be it both within the cities in the public side, but also in the private side. But also internally, it gives us an excuse for us to rub up against each other, right? So I've often said that the Sustainable City Year is a great kind of introduction for a number of different disciplines to start working together, because we have an actual project that makes us start to talk to each other, and that is kind of an intangible, extremely valuable. So, you know, examples where some work that I've done through Sustainable City Year with some professors in law has now actually spilled over. We start talking about, wow, what do you do in research? Oh, I do this other, you should talk to. And all of a sudden we've got a project that starts making all of our research stronger. So that kind of internal synergy and networking is really, really beneficial. So that's more or less the presentation I have for you today. I see this as a great opportunity to get to kind of change the face of how universities are doing providing education, how you define the education that we're providing, and how to make it really relevant and applied to our communities and cities around the state. So I'll take questions.
So a year is a pretty good chunk of an undergraduate's education, but it's a short period for a city planning process. So, and of course, doesn't necessarily jive with RFP cycles and their fiscal years and so forth. So what does SCI do to kind of smooth that out and make sure that the students hit the ground running and don't have to spend 6 months just figuring out what project to work on? Great question.
Great question. So a couple different parts to that. First of all, Sustainable City Year is a year-long endeavor that the universities take on, but one student isn't necessarily all year doing that. Some students actually are doing the entire year Sustainable City Year courses. There's courses throughout the university who've enlisted and said, like, this is what I want to be part of. And so there's students who've come in and been part of that, but by no means is that are they tracked to be working with that city all year. There's been some students who actually have done that, but that's not necessarily the case. we're all in trimesters, so it's not even, that we are only there for a year. We're only there for like 10, 11 weeks, right, for any one project. And so we do a lot of work on the front end. That's a lot of what we do in the SCY office, and also working with professors as we start out this process of figuring out how we can chunk the projects into pieces that can be done in the 10, 11 weeks. And that's a really critical aspect. Sometimes the projects are extremely large, and we have to take it up into different pieces that different courses will take on. As far as one other piece is not really fitting with the RFP cycles and it only being a year, it's a very intense year for the city. There's a tremendous number of hours from the city side that get put into this, and a lot of energy and a lot of kind of kicking up dust, we'll say. And so I think the idea of it being an intense year is purposeful, and then afterwards there's these outcomes that the city then takes on and that we'll continue to be working with them on.
With all the work that's coming out of this from students, how much is published for the website or for other students in other classes to go back and see what's already been done?
Great. So good question. So one thing I failed to mention is one of the things we do with Sustainable City Year is that at the end of each course, we pick 1 or 2 students to come back and write the reports for that course. And what the reports are is puts together all the information that happened over the course in a way that the city can use it. And that's done, the students do most of the writing with that in collaboration with a lot of the other students that are there who took the course. It's the professors who worked on that class as well as the staff members from the city who worked on the class are all contribute to that to make it a document that will be valuable for the city. Those reports, so each course has one of those, are then published and given to the city, and we have them on our website. So you can take a look. The Gresham reports are all up on our website, which is undergoing renovation. So you can find them in there. It'll soon be much easier to find them there. And the Salem reports should be going up soon. So that's a great way to see what kind of work has come out of this. And there's people you can connect to in PSU, definitely, that have been in this course. You can talk to them about what some of that experience was like.
I assume that you didn't address this because it wasn't in your presentation, at least, but the presentation of Salem from I-5 in comparison, say, to the presentation of the capital of Washington, Olympia, from I-5 is dramatically different. We look like the crassest, billboard-filled state. The presentation from I-5 makes you think, oh, well, this city is built for cars.
So,
and, who cares about pedestrians or bicyclists or anything, just because of the way we present.
Yeah. So,
So
we didn't look specifically at what the presentation was from I-5. The city actually did a lot of the projects actually involved thinking about the downtown not as a pass-through, but as a destination, and what kind of things need to happen. So some of the courses working on planning, architecture, urban design, and development, we're really looking at how can you take certain areas, certain districts, and make them destinations, not only for the citizens of Salem, but citizens outside of Salem. So that's definitely something that was looked at, not specifically the I-5 piece. Way in the back.
How are Gresham and Salem planning to document the longer-term outcomes from these projects?
So it's a really good question, a question we get all the time. So right now, Gresham has taken a lot of the work that we did last year, and I haven't talked. I actually originally was going to talk somewhat about Gresham as well, but I thought we've got so much to talk about with Salem that we should just keep with that. But a lot of the work that we did was a foundation for a lot of the projects that are happening right now. The work in Salem, we're still in process. So this is a fairly new program, and we're thrilled. So we just had communication with the city, part of the memo that I talked about, where the city's actually laying out what the impacts are of some of these courses, both the right now, this year impacts and the longer term impacts. And so we're hoping to track that and also help them, because there's a number of projects that we've all of a sudden have this what's the word? We've got all this knowledge within the student body and the professors of this work, and is there opportunities to continue on with it? So that's a critical piece of it. Salem is they're very much looking at how this work ends up is being translated. I was going to say is going to be translated, but right now is being translated into their work plans for city staff. And they've got, I think, 4 different city council meetings where the whole idea is that they are work sessions around these topics. I mean, they are engaged. It's great. It's great. Other questions?
In the project team, I think the professors and the students are from a different discipline, and they might use the different language.
Yes.
And is there any difficulties for them to communicate with each other? And if any, how to deal with that communication difficulties?
That is a great question. Yes, and this is one of the things that we're really excited about of putting people together. There's no good answer to it, and so some of the courses that we do are really just one discipline working on one course. A number of them are a couple different disciplines working on the course. I think some of the lessons that we've learned are, one, it's messy, and we tell the students up front, it's messy. And what we're really interested in is these different disciplines rubbing up against each other and figuring out what is the language, what are we even interested in, what's the universe that we talk about, what does your discipline even do, right? Those kinds of questions. And so a lot of the projects, there's a lot of not a clear path, right? But a lot of kind of give and take and pushing that happens. But the nice thing is that everyone's introduced to each other, and there's actually, at the end of these courses that do this kind of work, there is, the feedback we get from students, a much better understanding of oh, this is how they do. A lot of the times we do specific, not only that the 2 disciplines have to work in different courses, but for instance, there's a course that is planning and architecture students in the same course and where they work on term-long projects which have architects and planners on that team together. And so we kind of go through this process of them learning each other's language. And what we say is, this isn't going to be clean all the way through, but you'll be introduced to it so that when you do it the next time, you now have the basis. And when you go out in the field and you start working on a project and you're like, I should talk to the architect about that, your question is going to be, why isn't anyone else talking to the architect about that, right? Not, how do I talk to the architect about that? So so that's one lesson. The other lesson we learned is start with just 2. So many times multidisciplinary things want to do let's put 7 disciplines together all at the same time, work on the same issue with the same question. And that's disastrous, disastrous. We've learned that you find 2 disciplines and you get them to talk to each other and you let that messiness happen. And then if you're really sophisticated, you might add 1 more, right? And that's plenty for 10 weeks. We're hoping that as we do this more and more and more, that we've got the opportunity to make that richer and richer. But really, just get these 2 disciplines to understand each other. I think incrementally is a really important thing to do, not too much all at once.
So in terms of scope of the number of
in terms of scope, with the number of hours that you said, about 80,000?
80,000.
And then you take the size of the city of Salem, being one of the largest cities in the state here. 2 parts. One, do you feel like 80,000 was enough to address the number of issues and projects that were there? And if so, in the future, going to other cities that probably won't be necessarily as large, do you feel it might break into 2 different cities?
We should hire you. Those are exactly the kind of questions that we're dealing with. So as far as, was 80,000 hours enough to deal with the number of questions that Salem had? No. I mean, we had the same issue in Gresham. There's just endless amount. I mean, this is one of the things that really made us kind of sit up and listen is there's an endless need, right? Like an endless thirst for this kind of work. And so we really picked ones that worked, that were high priorities for the city and high priorities or high good matches for us. But there's tons more work that's possible on the one hand. On the other hand, not every city can deal with 600 students coming. Klamath Falls would have a little bit of trouble with 600 students coming down and working on their city. So one of the things that we're working on is doing both an SCY, the way that you see it right now, but then also doing an SCY rural or SCY small city, which would be 4 or 5 courses, right? So the idea is that you have enough scale so that it's an impact in the city. But that can change depending on what the size of the city is, right? So a smaller city having 5 courses working with them is a substantial amount of courses. And so that's something that we're actually in the works of developing right now. So yes, we're thinking about that.
All right, so you know, Gresham's kind of unique because of the public transportation system, and it's far different than Salem. So I know you didn't talk about Gresham, but could you maybe highlight some of the transportation-related projects that you did with Gresham and how related those were? Like, if you guys work with TriMet at all.
All right, we're going to pretend you are that I planted you to ask me. So this is one of the projects that we did in Gresham, and this was again, this is a studio actually I taught with three planning professors, 3 planning courses, looking at the area of Rockwood. For a minute, I was thinking Rockridge. Rockwood, which is has a transit stop, the light rail stop right there in the west side of Gresham. It's an economically disadvantaged area, high Latino population, high Slavic population. And there's a site right here, this site right here, which is owned by the city and is vacant. It used to be a Fred Meyer's that got demolished and vacated. And so the city's been wondering what to do with this for a really long time. And we had a bunch of students look at it and talk to the local. So this is an example where there was no dialogue really between the city and the local community, the Hispanic and the Slavic community. And through some of the work we did with the students, we were able to actually develop a dialogue which is healthy and living well beyond us, which we're really excited about. But the transportation-related issue, so TriMet was part of this. There's up here, there's a park and ride, an existing park and ride for TriMet. So the rail stops here, and there's another one that's way up here. And this is a park and ride. And as we were working on the site, we talked to some people at TriMet and said, so what's the parameters of what we can do with that transit, so with that park and ride? And they said, you know, it's so underperforming that we're willing to look at all kinds of things. And it doesn't really have to stay a parking ride, right? We just want to increase ridership. So if we can put housing on there that would be better, that would increase the number of ridership we have, that's within our goals. So we started talking to the local community, a large Hispanic community, as I mentioned. They said, you know, the problem is we don't have any large spaces where we can have some of the major gatherings that we have, kind of these large informal spaces. And so we said, well, what if we put these two things together? So this is a student group came up with the idea of like, well, what if we took that space and we did a land swap, and we put a park and ride here, but it's not necessarily a parking lot. It's a plaza which accepts cars. And during the days, it's a park and ride, and nights and weekends, it becomes an open space. So this is what it looks like. So this is, I'm not going to get too much in the design. This is a farmer's market that exists actually down here right now, how it might look in that space. And this is it as a parking lot, right? As a parking plaza, we'll call it. And so there's an opportunity here. You know, financially, it's fantastic for both the city and TriMet to have the shared agreement. For the community, it's fantastic. We don't have, and for the kind of the quality of the space, it's fantastic. And what we heard from TriMet is that if they can make this work here, they'd be interested in making it work all over the city. There's a very specific transportation-related piece. And I also use this as an example. One of the reasons this is one of the projects I was going to talk about, is this is a great example in my mind of how students can be riskier. So as my students were working on this, I was thinking to myself, if I had this as a professional, I would not present this project. I need to get too many people in line to say yes, or else, and if anyone says no, the whole thing's gone, and that's a whole lot of time I got to explain to my client why it is that I just burnt all their money on doing this thing that can't happen. But we had 5 different projects in the studio, right? So some of them were more within the realm of kind of conventional development, and this was a really different one. And we said, well, let's push that one forward. And so what the good thing about students is they can push it to a degree where all of a sudden there's a there. There's something you can talk about. And that conversation then with the city and with TriMet was enough to spark, ooh, this is something we could do, right? Which then maybe that's enough impetus then to hire someone to actually look at this project and think about both legally how the land swap would happen, and then design-wise what that design would actually be. So that's some of the work that we did. And yeah, they're a great transit-rich kind of community.
So my question is about how you define sustainable when you're working with the city, and then thinking about that financially sustainable. I felt like that was the one thing in school that, we were like pie in the sky and didn't think about what's the budget. And so I was wondering how you incorporate kind of financial sustainability into projects, maybe like this Rockwood Transit node.
Okay, good questions. Not easy to answer questions. So as far as how we define sustainability, I don't get into that too much. We all have our internal definition of sustainability. In my mind, we are within the ballpark enough altogether that we're okay. And actually, the way that we talk about sustainability is really different in different communities. Gresham is very proud of being sustainable and has worked really hard on kind of developing that in their community and branding themselves as that. And they've got a lot of really great work happening out there. Salem, as we started working with them, which is a much more conservative city, we don't really do sustainable. We do efficiency, right? We do sustainability is all about efficiency. We can do efficiency, right? So that's really what we talked about, and you know, it's very clear that's what we do. So that definition of sustainability is, I think, slightly can change in different places. As far as the economic piece, it is the hardest part to do when you're in school. So one of the things that we're working on developing right now is more relationships with people both in our partner cities and within our school, and actually we're working on trying to get relationships here at PSU with the real estate department, right? Because that's a kind of a key piece of looking at how some of the developments can happen and making things financially feasible. And right now what we really use mostly is our partnerships with the cities and our partnerships with private developers or private offices, where we bring them in and they are integral to our process. So you know, we have a lot of private developers or architecture firms or transportation planners that come in and are part of the classes that we teach. They'll come in and, you know, give guest lectures or review student work, and we use their litmus test of how is this within the realm of possible, right? We're hoping that that becomes much more robust, but so far they've been a very good litmus test. I know some of the work that in Chris's class on the downtown circulation, a lot of the analysis students did was, well, this is the impact and this is what it do, and you know, kind of it seemed to me discussions with the peers and with the city of, but this one really seems outside of the realm of something that could happen in the short term. Or, and I'll say just as importantly as the financial piece, politically, this is something that probably the city's not going to get behind right now. So, and you know, really clear. So we had these 5 options. We discounted these first 3 just from those means, and then we had 2 that we really developed. So there is that conversation that's happening.
I just wanted to add something to that. Okay, so I was actually in that class, and for our project, we did the bike lanes on Church and High Street.
Yeah.
And when we looked at our budgeting, we didn't do like a specific cost analysis and say, this is how much it's going to cost. But when we looked at like the 3 different options that we were going to do, we kind of looked and said, okay, well, if we're going to rank them 1 through 3, you know, this is the one that's going to cost the most, second most, and then the least. And then that's how we kind of did it. We did it on like a relative scale. So we didn't actually go through and put numbers down on anything. So that's how we did it for our project.
And that's exactly those kind of things. And actually, this coming year, the city that we're working with, which hopefully we're pointing towards an announcement next week of what that city who that city is. The economics department at U of O has been very interested in, they said, you know, we do cost-benefit analysis like crazy. We can do all kinds of analysis here. And so we've got some issues of like an interest from the city of, should we transfer our entire fleet from what we've got to electric vehicles? What would the impact of that be? And is it economic? What is the economic impact? And the economics department for us said, oh, yeah, we can do that. No problem. That's the kind of things that we do. So we're hoping to become more and more robust in that. And I think that's it. That's all.
Okay. So before we thank Nico for the presentation today, next week we have Christopher Yake from Metro talking about TODs and 3D, how transit-oriented is the Portland region. So with that, thank you very much, Nico.
Thank you. So I'll just add one.